Oh, there you go. We're recording, apparently. All right, so we're in Genesis 18. This is a fun one. Again, we're going through various genres here, trying to understand how do we interpret the various genres. So in Genesis, we're in narrative, and just straight up narrative, and then in there's certain questions that we have to ask for narrative that we don't ask for, say, poetry. But this isn't a legal text; it's just a narrative, and there are some interesting things in this particular passage. Let's say, okay, so let's look at verse 16. I believe I assigned you. Yes. Excellent. So let's look at verse 16. They've been eating. This is the men, the three men that are with Abraham. So there in verse 16, Vayakumu, they rose Misham from there, Anashim, the men rose from there. Vayashkifu, and they gazed out upon the face of Sodom, al Panei Sodom. Va'abraham, Holek, Imam, la Shalham, Shalacham, and Moses went with them to send them, Shalacham. And the Lord, so one of these figures is Yahweh. So verse 17, Vadonai Amar, and the Lord said, and he asks a question there, and you can see that third word in verse 17 is a question mark, because that's the hey plus the patak, which is a odd form, but he is asking, and it's curious. We don't really know who he's asking. He's just asking. So is he asking? Is he asking the other two men? Is he just asking the air? Is he asking? Is he asking the narrator? We don't really know who he's asking, because nobody really answers it. He asks the question, gives his reasoning for why he's asking the question, and then in verse 20, he is going to actually speak and say the thing that he debated saying. There, should I hide? Again, asking the question, Hamkaseh, should I be hiding? Ani, I hiding from Abraham, Asher Ani Oseh, what I'm going to do. So, or what I am doing. He's doing something. Should I tell him? And then he gives his reasoning. Abraham, Hayo Yehye Lagoy Gadol Va'atzum. He's going to be a great and mighty nation. He will surely be a great and mighty nation. We've got the infinitive there. Hayo, his being, Yehye, he will be. So Hayo, that's an odd form of the infinitive absolute, but that is what it is. The hey has dropped off and become the and you've got the holem vav there from the infinitive absolute. So normally you'd have hey yod holem vav hey, that would be the full form, but that hey has dropped off because you've got a vowel that follows it. And for whatever reason, when a word ends in hey, it doesn't like to keep that. When the next word starts with that yod vowel, yeah. So hayo, and even then, it's odd because hayo and hayo with the H or without the H sound the same. So for whatever reason, they drop it because they think it sounds better, sort of. So it's just one of those weird quirks with hey. Anytime hey has an excuse to leave, it'll leave. So it looks like a 3ms possessive pronoun there on hayo, but it's actually part of the infinitive absolute. Abraham will be a great nation, and gadol lagoy, gadol, great nation, va'atzum, and mighty, v'nivraku, and they will be blessed. Bo, they will be blessed in him. Kol goye haaretz, all the nations of the earth. And then verse 19, ki yadativ, for I know him, lama'an, on account of which, yatzaveh, et banav, va'et beito, on account of which he will command his sons and his daughters after him, aharav, v'shamaru, and they will keep derek Adonai, and they will keep the way of the Lord, la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat, to do or to be doing righteousness and justice, lama'an, on account of which habi, he will bring, Yahweh will bring all Abraham, upon Abraham, et asher deber alive, that which he spoke over him. It's interesting, God here is speaking in the third person, which often happens in poetics, that God will speak in the third person, and all of a sudden you're like, wasn't he speaking? So, the Lord said in verse 17, and then even in verse 19, he says, for I have chosen him. And then, but then he, or the ESV translates it chosen, but I have known him, literally in verse 19, on account of which he will command his children. And, but then he speaks in the third person, on account of which Yahweh will do over Abraham all that he said he would do, which is kind of interesting that God kind of jumps around and says that. There in verse 20, Vayomer Adonai Za'akat, the cry, Sodom of Sodom, the Amorah and Gomorrah. Not really sure where the Gimel came in Amorah that we get Gomorrah. Perhaps this is just going out on a limb here. It's possible there is a theory that at one time ayin was actually vocalized, because in other languages like Arabic it still is, and has kind of that G sound, and so it's possible that that's where the G is coming from when we Latinize it. We do the same actually. Aza becomes Gaza with a G, Gaza, even though in Hebrew it's just ayin zayin with an A, Aza. So that's probably where the G in Gomorrah, Sodom and Gomorrah, rather than Sodom and Amorah, came from. Ki Rabbah, for it is very great, or perhaps even it has multiplied. The cry has come upon, has gone up before God. Bahatatam, and their sin. Ki kavda ma'od, and their sin, for it is very glorious, or probably more literally, it is very weighty, which is a kind of a fascinating use of that word kavod, meaning glory. um, or yeah, it's very heavy, it's very weighty. There's a lot of it. So usually when we have a cry that comes up before God, it's usually a cry for justice. And yet in this case, the cry that has come up is a cry, some translations say against Sodom and Gomorrah, rather than the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah. But maybe it's those in Sodom and Gomorrah who are being oppressed, although there don't seem to be very many of them. So we're not really sure where the cry is coming from. But there is this cry that is coming up before them. So then God says in verse 21, Erada na, so I will surely go down, and I will see, Hakatsa'akata, as its cry, as its outcry, Za'ak, Hava'a, has come, a lie, to me, asu kala. They have done all. So the cough there in hakatsa'akata, in that word is I will see, I will see the as its cry. So it's almost a comparative. I will see if its cry that has come to me, if they have done all that that cry has said. Which again is an odd, it's an odd construction that they would put it that way, because we've got this this cry that has come before God. Actually, two different words for outcry. This that has come before God, but he's basically going down to see if it's going to be correct or not, because he finishes there in verse 21 by saying "Va'im lo eda'a," and if not, I will know. Which again is interesting, and this is where it becomes kind of fun when you talk about narrative. Is that narrative, especially in terms of Genesis and ancient narrative, there are times where there are things described that are they don't really fit our little box in terms of theology. Why is God actually physically going to Sodom and Gomorrah to see it, to see if their cry is true or not? I mean, does he really need to go and see it to know if it's accurate? Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's very much for Abraham's sake. So he's kind of come down and he's going past Abraham on purpose. So it's not so much that he came down to go see Sodom and Gomorrah, even though that's how he spins it. He's really coming down because he's coming down to go past Abraham, so that Abraham will have this conversation about being an intercessor.
It seems like Abraham realizes that as the conversation goes on, because he's like 110,
mm-hmm.
like just one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh, this was to show me there's no one righteous in
that city. Yeah. Yep. And you've got that phrase in verse 18, Abraham's going to become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations on earth shall be blessed in him. And here we see God is basically giving Abraham information for Abraham to be a blessing. Now, in this particular case, Sodom and Gomorrah is still going to get wiped out. So, maybe Abraham should have kept his number, to 3, maybe. But, he's interceding on behalf of the people, trying to spare the righteous from that nation. So he is acting as a blessing, which he's specifically praying for, not for Sodom and Gomorrah as a whole. He's concerned about the righteous in that city. but it does give a little nuance to what exactly it means that all the nations shall be blessed in him. Yes, it ultimately is going to be fulfilled in Christ, but in this particular instance, Abraham is already being blessed. Which is ironic because Lot basically went to Sodom and Gomorrah to get away from Abraham because they were quarreling. And the blessing that was given after Noah was that Jephthah would dwell in the tents of Shem, and that he would be blessed by being in the tents of Shem. Now, Lot is not a descendant of Jephthah. He is a descendant of Shem, just like Abraham. But it is interesting when you go away from the tents of the righteous, bad things happen. A good example is the Russians got rid of the Moravians. They persecuted them. So the Moravians left Russia and came to the United States and settled in Kansas. Except that when they lived in Russia, they had developed a new kind of wheat called winter wheat. Well, they took it with them when they left Russia and planted it in Kansas, which is why Kansas has so much wheat in it. And it became America's breadbasket because they brought their wheat with them. The United States was blessed because of it. Russia was basically cursed because they lost their wheat. So there are blessings of being in the tents of the righteous. And when you persecute them and they leave, the wicked suffer. So, one of those, not having anything to do with wheat, but one of those is just the intercession of the righteous, that the righteous are praying for the people in that particular city. I mean, even Paul says that, pray for kings and all those in authority, pray for your kings so that you can lead peaceful and quiet lives. So there is that intercessory aspect of the life of believers. In this case, again, Abraham just doesn't know that there aren't as many righteous people in the city as he thinks there are. I wonder what it is that caused him to pick the number that he did. I wonder if he just thought that there's got to be 10. I mean, you got Abraham, you got Lot, you got his 2 daughters, you got a wife, and you've got 2 sons-in-law. That's 7. Surely there's 3 more people. And then realizing that actually there aren't even those 7. There's probably just 1. And even that's debatable. So you've got that 1, and then the daughters are kind of lumped in because of the faith of Lot. And Peter makes him out to be a preacher of righteousness whose soul respects. Yeah, I'm not always convinced Peter was right on that one, but it is in scripture, so I suppose we have to take it at face value. Yeah. So that forms the background then to the passage that we're looking at tonight in verse 22. So Jordan, you want to go ahead and read verse 22 and translate it for us?
Sure. Vayifnu misham ha'anashim vayelku Sudoma va'Avraham odenu omed lifnei Adonai. I've read backwards. Wait, no.
No, you're right.
Okay. I threw myself off for a second. Okay. There we go. So yeah. And I have that as just and the men turned from there and went to Sodom, and Abraham again stood before the Lord.
Mm-hmm. This is one of the places here in verse 22, Avraham odenu omed lifnei Adonai, that the Masoretes have told us that they changed the text. I forget what the Tikkun Sofarim is the technical term. And just the shorthand is TIQ space SOPH. So it looks like Tick Soph. So Tikkun Sofarim. And the person who coined that term was Rabbi Shimon, who's sometimes known as Rabbi Ammon, who lived sometime between 200 and 500 BC. There were several different, we'll call them branches, but generations, we'll call them, of the scholars that worked on the original Talmud. We have what's called the Amoraic era, which is from Amar, meaning to say. It refers to Jewish scholars of the period from 200 to 500. Prior to them, prior to the Amoraim, we have the Tanaim, which is prior to 200. Those are the teachers. They are the ones who wrote the Mishnah. The Amoraim are the ones who put together what is called the Gemara, which is the text that surrounds the Mishnah. So when you have a copy of the Talmud, it has the Mishnah in the middle, and then the Gemarim is the text that goes around the Mishnah and is kind of a commentary on the commentary. So as they study the Talmud, that's what they're looking at. They're looking at the original Mishnah, that oral tradition, but then they're also looking at the Gemara, which is the part of the Talmud that comments on the Mishnah. So it's a interesting. Gemara sounds like Gomorrah, but they actually have nothing to do with each other. It comes from the root Gemar, which means to complete. So it's basically a completion of the oral tradition. So in that oral tradition, they decided in 17 different places, they decided that the text must be wrong. So in Genesis 18:2, the original text said Yahweh stood before Abraham. But that sounds like he's deferring to Abraham. And they decided that that was incorrect. It couldn't be that. So they changed it. Some of these 17 are random. Some of them are put in because it makes more sense. So like, for instance, in 2 Samuel chapter 20, somebody says, "Every man to his tent, so Israel." Well, the original apparently said, "Every man to his gods," and which instead of Ohel is Allah. So instead of Aleph Hey Lamed for tent, it was Aleph Lamed Hey for Eloah, for gods. And they decided way back in, before 500 BC, they decided this is crazy. It can't mean that. It's got to mean tents. So they changed it. But they noted that they had changed it. And so they used this term, Tikkun Sopharim. Genesis 18 is probably one of the more famous ones. Let's see. Job 32 says that they had condemned Job. The original says they had condemned God. Lamentations 3:20, my soul sinks down within me. The original probably said, my soul sinks down upon you. I think there's another example. Anyway, you can find these all on Wikipedia if you're overly interested. But this is the most famous one, where they have changed it. Although there is an example in 1 Kings 21, Naboth is accused of cursing God. So that the original said in Jezebel's accusation, Naboth has cursed God and king. Everybody knew that's what it said, but they were uncomfortable with it saying cursed God. So they changed it to blessed God, but everybody understood it meant cursed. So this is just, some of this is theologically motivated, and because they theologically believed that certain things should not be in the text. And so this is one of them where Abraham stood before God. It's interesting, most English translations go with Abraham stood before God, even though we have from Masoretic authority and from all the way back to Rabbi Simon, we have them saying, we changed it. We changed it. We know we changed it. Here's why we changed it. And yet, as much as we like to be purists, we all go with the change for whatever reason. So I suppose it's possible, especially in terms of textual criticism, it's possible that the original said Abraham stood before God and somebody screwed up. I find that highly unlikely. I think part of it is we read too much into it to say God stood before Abraham and, oh, that's inappropriate. He was talking to Abraham, so he stood in front of him. So I point that out just because it's fairly famous. It doesn't really make a difference in our exegesis of the text, so that one's for free. Okay, so he stands before Abraham, and then verse 23.
Vayegosh Avraham Vayomer Ha'ah Tispet Tzadik Im Rasha. That Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked?
Yep. Yes. Tisfeh can also mean sweep away. So some of it depends on how poetic you want to be. But yeah, destroy. Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? Yeah. So it's interesting in verses 21 and previous, God says, should I tell Abraham what I'm going to do? But there's no real indication that he ever does that. Although he does say in verse 20 and 21, he does say the outcry has come up. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to see if it's as bad as they say. But he doesn't really tell Abraham that he's going to destroy the city. And he doesn't go down. I mean, he tells Abraham, I'm going to go down, I'm going to look. And then he doesn't go anywhere. He's still there. It's the two men who have gone down. The two angels go down. Which is again, it's one of the fascinating things about Hebrew narrative. There's certain details that bother us that didn't bother them. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie The Pink Panther, the one with, I just lost his name. No, well, there's that one. There was an even previous version. Yeah, funny guy. Can't remember his name.
Steve Martin.
No, it was even before him. There was a version in the 80s. Yeah, I don't know. It's gone. Anyway, But there's a scene where he's like, we have to figure out where they're keeping the pink diamond, the Pink Panther, the diamond. Well, the next scene is he's at the castle where they keep it. And I remember I was watching with a group of junior hires. I'm like, how did he know that's where he was supposed to go? And they're like, shut up, it doesn't matter. I'm like, no, it matters. How did he know that's where he was supposed to go? He just said, I need to figure out where they have it. And then boom, he's at the castle. That doesn't make any sense. And it bothered me. But apparently that didn't bother any audiences in the 80s because that movie made a lot of money. A lot of people loved it, and they made like 5 movies, 4 or 5 sequels of it, which is kind of funny. So the same thing here. There's just details that just aren't given. You just kind of have to infer what happened. That God says, I'm going to go down, even though the 2 angels go down and not God. God doesn't tell Abraham, I'm going to destroy the city, but apparently Abraham knows he's going to destroy the city. So Abraham knows a lot, or has inferred a lot from what God is telling him here in the story. And so, he responds and says, well, okay, but you're not going to kill the righteous, are you? And then he gets even more bold. Verse 24.
You can read that. Ulai yesh hamishim sadikim batok ha'ir ha'af tisfe velo tisha lamakom lama'an hamishim had hasadikim asher bakir ba. I have that as what if there are 50 righteous in the midst of the city? Will you indeed sweep away and not spare the place on account of 50 righteous who draw near to it, approach it? There was a few verbs there that were a little bit weird.
Mm-hmm.
So at least in the lexicon, I think what had what was it? Tisha, I think just had to carry or to lift up, but I saw, at least in the ESV, was spare.
Yep.
Then Bakir Ba, I think the lexicon in the book gave approach or draw near to, be in, that kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah. Kir Ba can also be a noun, just meaning in it midst.
Okay.
Midst rather than a verb form.
Okay.
So on account of the 50 righteous which are in its midst.
Okay.
Nasa does mean to lift or to bear. It's the same word that shows up in the Aaronic blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So there's a number of places where Nasa is a stand-in for favor or for forgiveness or sparing, as though he's either lifting up the burden from them or lifting up their sin from them, or lifting up lifting up their what else you would call it, lifting up their iniquity, lifting up, some people have suggested even lifting up their faces so that they can see God, that their heads are downcast and that they're being lifted up. So I've heard some people suggest that that's kind of the idea behind, may the Lord bless you and keep you, may cause his face to shine upon you. And so he's turning to you and then lifting up his countenance upon you, or perhaps even lifting you up so that you behold his countenance. There's a couple different ways you could look at that, but that lifting idea often has to do with sparing or forgiveness. It's one of those words similar to kavod or kavad. It has to do with glory. but the nuance of it is weight. Here, the nuance is a lifting and taking away, but it's sometimes hard to know how much of that is just idiomatic and it's not quite literal. It's hard to tell in some places. Sometimes when it says, their sin was heavy, okay, we can picture that. When we say we're going to glorify God, we're not making God heavy. We are acknowledging his heaviness, but it's not heavy in terms of heavy in terms of weight. It's heavy in terms of just his being. So even there, it's kind of hard to know how much did the author intend, how much of it is inherent in the root. Same here with Nasa, of we can reason about, well, it means lifting and taking away, and yeah, probably, but it's hard to know for sure that's how it was intended. Verse 25.
Kalila,
Laka.
Ma'asut, Kadambar, Hazet, Lahamit, Sadiq, Im, Rasha, Bahaya, Sadiq, Karasha, Khalila, Lake, Shofet, Haaretz, Lo Yaaseh, Mishpat. Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you, shall the judge of all the earth not do right.
Mm-hmm. Yep, or not do justice. Yep. It's interesting. In some places, we even translate Halilah as God forbid. God forbid it, God, that you should do this. So Abraham's being pretty bold here. He's not just asking. He's coming pretty close to demanding, and not only demanding, he thinks that it's so wrong that it's basically abominable that God would do this. Which it bothers me when I hear people say, well, the God I worship would never do that. I'm like, yeah, anytime anybody ever wants to utter those words, we got problems. There's very few times in my life, I think, that I've ever thought that and been right. We don't say that because we assume if God did something, he's God. It reminds me a little bit of what Richard Nixon said in one of his interviews when he was in the process of being impeached. They asked him, they said, so do you think that the president of the United States should be able to do crime? And he said, no, I think that when the president of the United States does something, by definition, it can't be a crime. And, everybody kind of rolled their eyes, and that's the dumbest thing anybody's ever said. And, especially since it wasn't for the good of the country, it was to save his own political butt for wiretapping at the Watergate Hotel. But, here, in a sense, we have that feeling with God. God says he's going to do something. Who are we to argue with him? And to say, no, God, you can't do that. And yet, there are multiple instances where that's exactly what happens. Abraham argues with God, Moses argues with God, Jeremiah argues with God. We've got all these instances where people argue with God and say, God, you can't do that. And it makes us uncomfortable because you can't argue with God. If God wants to do something, it must be right. There's even that hymn, "Whatever my God ordains is right," which is a great hymn and it's a great idea, and yet does seem, especially in the Old Testament, it does seem that God does things just to get his people to remind him that he can't do things. Which again is just it's a fascinating idea, um, and a common motif in the Old Testament where this happens, where people are arguing, and yeah, once we get out of the Old Testament, we don't see it as much anymore. But it does happen. We talked a little bit last night about Jesus praying, take this cup from me. And yet he says, not what I will, but what you will. And yet Abraham doesn't say, it'd be really great if you could spare the city for 50 people, but not what I will, but what you will. Instead, he says, no, actually, you will violate your own character as the judge of all the earth if you do such an injustice. Which is funny because when you get to Ezekiel, God says to Ezekiel, yeah, pretty much the righteous are going to die with the wicked. That sucks, but that's how the cookie crumbles. And Ezekiel's kind of like, yeah, okay. They go around, they put marks on the head of the righteous, but God says some of the righteous are going to die with the wicked. And, we're like, well, that's not fair. You're like, well, what would Abraham have thought if he'd heard what they said in Ezekiel? So it's fascinating that there's quite a change here. So as if you were, teaching this passage to somebody, why is the author telling us about this conversation?
I think maybe throughout the book of Genesis is almost like a change in understanding of what the righteous means. About what I think moving less or more away from kind of a works righteous understanding that they could have been tempted to, and then more the righteous are those who fear God and call upon him. You see, like after Abraham for the most part does pretty well. He has a few mistakes here and there, but then his sons after him do almost like increasingly worse, but they still fear God and are still called the righteous.
Yeah,
as they fear God. So it's almost like contrasting this passage and the passage from Ezekiel you mentioned. It's almost like if we accept Abraham's, or if we accept what could potentially be Abraham's understanding of righteous, the people who are pure and holy by their own works, and it would be unfair for them to be punished in this way. And by the time Ezekiel comes around and realizes that's not really, if that's the definition of righteous, then no one is righteous.
Right.
It's just those who fear God, and then part of fearing God is accepting whatever his will is and accepting whatever comes from his will. So if you are righteous, then you should accept God's authority to decree whatever he wills for your life, regardless of however you've lived.
Yeah. So basically we're going to get to the end of the chapter and God and Abraham go their separate ways. And then Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. I think, Jordan, you pointed it out last night at prayer meeting of you have this great conversation between God and Abraham that accomplishes absolutely nothing. Because the very thing that Abraham wants doesn't happen. God can't find 10 people. And so there ends up being the incredible destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. He does spare Lot. But to your point, what we know of Lot and what we've seen so far of Lot, and especially of what we see of Lot later on, kind of raises the question just how righteous is Lot? So if we're basing this on their righteousness, Lot doesn't seem all that righteous, in terms of their personal deeds. He even when push comes to shove, he knows he's got to get out of Sodom and Gomorrah, but he kind of likes it. So he doesn't really want to leave. He's just kind of chilling until the angels basically say, either you go now or you die. And, Lot's wife obviously wants to stay. The daughters go with him, but then they're convinced that every single human being on the planet has died and that the only three people that are left are the two daughters and Lot. They get him drunk, which doesn't seem to be that difficult of a task. Again, you're fleeing for your life. So you're getting out of Dodge as fast as you possibly can. And yet somehow you thought to take the alcohol with you. It is an interesting aspect of the story of, we left behind the two sons-in-laws, but hey, we got the beer, so everything's good. Yeah, you must have been a Presbyterian. There you go. They get him, rip-roaring drunk, which doesn't seem to have been that big of a task. And then they both get pregnant by him. And there's no comment on either what he did or his reaction. He just disappears from the story. Can you imagine him walking into the town of Zor and, oh, where are the fathers? Oh, he's right here. I thought you said he was your father. Well, he is. He's my father too. It's just such a screwed up story. So all of a sudden we're left with, wait a minute, who's really the righteous one here? And you're right. It's suddenly very ambiguous. The only person that we know is fairly righteous is Abraham, but only because it's been several chapters since he screwed up. Although he screwed up in chapter 17 and we're in chapter 18. So it's probably only really been a chapter since he had Ishmael. So we haven't really gone that far before he's messed up. So yeah, there's a couple of questions that are raised by the text in terms of who is the righteous and this whole interaction with God. It's redefining their understanding of God. It's redefining their understanding of righteous. And it is, in a sense, interacting with how do we talk to God about who we understand God to be? Because Abraham could be wrong. Maybe it's not an injustice to sweep away the wicked with the righteous. It happens. And it happens throughout the Old Testament. So it's interesting that God doesn't ever push back and say, now, wait a minute, Abraham, you don't know what's going on here. Don't you tell me what to do. Don't you tell me how to do my job. Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane, bro. Stay in your lane. But he doesn't. He just says, yeah, okay, I'll give you 50. Sure, 50 would be fine. And it's funny that as we go on, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's funny that Abraham almost seems embarrassed to ask for the next number. It's like you already insulted the God of the universe by telling him that he can't do what he says he's going to do because you, as a human being, think that that's injustice. You've already told him in no uncertain terms that God would forbid what God wants to do. And then you're a little concerned that maybe he's going to be irritated that you bothered him by asking for 30 instead of 50. It is almost comedic at that point. There's not really much more that you can say, Abraham, that's going to get God mad if you just said what you said and he didn't get mad. So verse, let's see, I think we're in verse 26.
Yeah, I can read that.
Okay.
I think that was mine. Vayomer Adonai im emza bistam hamishim sadikim batok ha'ir vanashoti lakal hakom hamakom ba'aviram. I have, and God said, if I find within Sodom 50 righteous within the city, I will lift or spare all the place because of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, Jeremiah, if you want to do 27?
Just read it. And then
Uh-huh.
I didn't prepare that.
Oh, did we? Oh, yeah, we only went through 26. You're right. Yeah, if you want to read 27.
Okay. Vaya, on Abraham, Vayomer, Hinena, Hoalet, Hoalati, Ladaber, El Adane, Ba'anoki, Afe, Va'afer.
Okay. What is Vaya'an? Verse 20, the beginning of the verse, Vaya'an. Uh-huh. Which means?
Go over, pass over.
Mm-mm.
No.
No, that's yeah, it would be more Allah.
Allah.
Yeah, Ana
I remember Anna.
means to answer.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yep.
Answered Abraham.
Abraham answered to God. Yep, Vayomer or Vayomar.
And he said,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, maybe I'm just forgetting.
Hine is behold.
Oh, okay.
So it's like behold, please, or behold now. So you've got a vav, holem vav after the hay. How did the holem vav get there?
Was there a yod?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
So, y'all, is that the verb?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Is that undertake?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
First person ending?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So is it behold I undertake?
Yep.
Okay.
Or because it's a perfect, I have undertaken.
Took. Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Undertook. Yep.
I've undertaken. The devars that words or.
Mm-hmm. So this would be a verb. So I've undertaken to,
say,
yep,
or,
to stay or to speak.
to speak to Yahweh or to Adonai.
Yep.
To speak to Adonai. Noki.
Anoki is a pronoun.
So that was it the he?
It's a first person I.
Oh.
Usually it's ani, but sometimes we get the full version of anoki.
Oh, okay. And I are.
Afar is a noun, a fairly common noun. Afer is not as common. Afar, you know afar.
I remember it from vocab, but I don't remember
Mhm.
what the
Yeah.
definition is.
Afar means dust.
Okay. And
So I am dust, but Afer. Did you have a guess as what Afer means? I am dust and
are they dust or
what does Job say? I repent for I am dust and
ashes?
ashes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Which is part of what makes me think in Job, for instance, when we talked about in Sunday school, that Job is repenting of his humanity. He's not repenting in dust and ashes. I tend to think of it, he's repenting the fact that I am dust and ashes. I'm a human being. I'm frail. I don't understand things. I talked about things I didn't get. I'm limited. I should have just kept my mouth shut. So Abraham's kind of admitting the same thing. I'm but dust and ashes. And yet Abraham, again, it's humorous of, look, I'm but dust and ashes. So maybe 50 is where we should stop. What do I know? And it's like, you just insulted God and told him that he couldn't do what he wanted to do. And now you're concerned that maybe you've offended him. It's just kind of funny. And maybe it's not meant to be humorous, but I always find it funny of you just told the God of the universe that God was going to forbid him from doing what he wanted to do when he is the God of the universe. And yet now you're concerned that as a human being, you may have overstepped your bounds by dropping the number from 50 to 30. So kind of, I don't know if ironic is the right word there. I think it's supposed to be somewhat humorous, but maybe not. Yeah, and actually he doesn't there in verse 27, he doesn't give the number, he gives that in verse 28, but he does say, look, I've already started this, so I guess I might as well just keep going. So maybe he does understand, I've already overstepped, so I might as well just keep going. If you're gonna kill me, might as well go out and blaze glory, maybe. So verse 28 there. Jordan, you want to try that one?
Sure. Ulai Yixarun Hamishim Zadikim Hamisha Hatishit. Where did I go? Bahamisha et Kal Ha'ir Vayomer lo Ashit Im Emza Sham Avram Vahamisha. So Ulai. My reader's edition says that's what if.
Mm-hmm.
Again.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I remember reading that earlier.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yixarun. It's it again. The reader's edition. The apparatus says that's lack. Yixarun.
Yep. So parse that. Is it perfect or imperfect?
Imperfect.
Yep. And masculine or feminine?
Masculine.
And plural or singular?
Well, the un ending is weird. I don't recognize that.
Yeah, this is I forget which lesson I talk about this. I think I might have mentioned it last time in the lecture about the paragogic nun.
Mm-hmm.
I think Van Pelt colloquially calls it the flying nun.
Okay.
It just randomly shows up, but it usually shows up after you have you've got the shurik at the end of the word, and then you've got something that comes at the beginning of the next word that would sound weird. So if you had Yaksaruhamish, the rucha almost sounds like ruach.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing the rucha, they didn't thought that sounded good, so they went with runcha. So it's a It's just a way to break up the pronunciation to get it to flow the way they thought it should flow.
Yeah. So it's a third masculine and plural.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So perhaps
There were 50 men, or 50 righteous. Hamisha, and then is that 50 again? Hamisha,
no, Mishim with the Hirik Yod Mem is 50.
okay.
This is
Yeah.
just Shah.
Okay.
So what's the subject of Yaksarun?
Sarun, so that's the city is lacking.
It could be, but city doesn't get mentioned for a while.
Yeah.
So what is immediately following the verb?
Just, what if the 50 are lacking?
Yes, so the 50 righteous are lacking,
Okay.
or if the 50, it's tough to know if the tzaddakim goes with the hamisham. Probably given the well, it could go either way, I suppose. So either the 50 are lacking or the 50 righteous are lacking. What are they lacking?
Forget what Misha is.
So Hamishim is 50.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is Hamisha, what's your guess?
Just lacking in that number.
So what's the number? If Mishim is 50, what is Hamisha?
Is it not 50?
Not 50. No.
50 is Hamisha.
We form the T.
5, right? Okay,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 50, 60, 70, you form those by putting the eem
Yeah, that's right.
or oat at the end. Yep.
Hamish. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So they're lacking 5.
Okay. I don't recognize this next word.
Okay. What do you see
Touch.
at the beginning of the word?
The hey, is that the interrogative?
It is. Yes.
And then tish heat, or tosh. The root is toshach.
Well, how do you get the eat at the end?
Yeah. That would sounds like a third hay.
Okay, that's possible.
But then
So if it was a third hay, what would be the root?
shachach.
Shacha. Yep. So that would make the tav, the first tav would make that a
The imperfect performative.
And what's under the tav?
The patak.
And so patak and then a hirik yod after the chait. What kind of verb is this?
Oh, hithiel, isn't it?
Yep. So what is shacha?
I don't think I remember that one off the top of my head. Yeah.
Destroy. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So will you cause to be destroyed, or will you destroy with a question mark?
Okay. All right, and then destroy, and then what is the bait doing here? It's the preposition in or on? Oh, destroy on upon the.
Yeah, you could probably even say on account of.
Okay. So destroy on account of the 5. Et Kal Ha'ir, destroy all the city for the five. And then he said, yeah, okay. Surely you will not destroy with Imza. What was this? Imza, the Matzah, I know that's been repeated throughout this passage. What do I have? Oh, that's find. Okay.
Huh?
So finding or with finding
What is Emsa with the olive in front?
that's I find.
Yep. If I
Okay.
find Sham.
I find Sham, and then ooh, what was that? Forget. Then is it like is that or
It's you're close. It's not then. It's a directive.
okay.
So then would have to do with time.
Mhm.
Sham has to do with location.
Okay.
So you wouldn't translate it as then. You would translate it more as there. If I find it there.
Okay.
And what is Arba'im?
Mm.
Arba'im.
40.
What's that?
40.
Yes, 40 Bahamisham or Bahamisha.
Yeah. So 45.
Yep, very good.
40 and 5. Okay.
Yep. So if I find 45, yep. And then he says the Yosef Ode, and he again to speak to me, Elav, which and he again spoke to he again spoke to his God, I guess would be the more or to him, Elav. So Abraham has been describing his conversation. Let me say this to you, but now we've kind of shifted into now we're talking in the third person. Of now the narrator is narrating this. Says so he added again to speak to him, and he said, perhaps you find there 40. And he said to him, I will not do it on account of 40. Then verse 30, and he said, do not now burn Yahar, do not now burn to my Lord, or do not get angry with me, basically, and refers to himself as he's either referring to himself as my Lord, don't get angry to me, or don't let my Lord get angry, and I will speak. Perhaps you find there 30. Vayomer lo eseh. And he says, I won't do it. Im emsa sham shaloshim. If I find there 30. And Abraham keeps going. I mean, what's he got to lose at this point? So he says, Hine, not behold now, or behold, please. Ho alti ladaver el Adonai, which is very much a repetition of what he said earlier, up in verse. What verse was that? Verse 27, fifth word in. He's kind of repeating himself here. I've undertaken to speak to my Lord. perhaps you find there 20. And he says, I will not destroy on account of 20. Then verse 32, and he says, again, what he said in verse 30, do not now please get angry or burn. Again, could be against my Lord, or don't let it, perhaps it could even be, don't let it infuriate my Lord. And I will speak another time. Perhaps there are 10 there. The ak ha pa'am. Pa'am is a time or occurrence. Ak is surely, or some the ESV translates it as but this once. He probably means this is the last time I'm going to ask. So surely this once, let me ask. Perhaps you find there 10, and he says, I will not destroy on account of the 10. And the Lord went up, Yelech, the Lord left or departed, Ka'asher Kila, when it was finished, when he finished speaking to Abraham, Ladaber el Abraham, and Abraham, Shav Lamakomo, he returned to his place. And then God went and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So again, it's a fascinating passage. Because verse 19, or excuse me, chapter 19 starts with the two men, or the two angels, the two messengers went to or came into Sodom in the evening. And Lot was sitting at the gates of Sodom, and he saw them, and he rose and he called to them, and he bowed down. They bowed down. No, I'm sorry. He bowed down. No, they bowed down. They bowed down their noses to the ground. And he says, you got to come home with me because bad things are going to happen if you stay out here. So, and you know how the rest of the story ends. So it's a fascinating story here of Abraham interacting with God. And we've picked up on a number of the different themes here. You've got God who is going to Sodom and Gomorrah, but he stops by Abraham on the way just so that he can have this conversation. He has the conversation in part because Abraham's a blessing upon all the nations, including Sodom and Gomorrah. He tells Abraham what's going to happen so that Abraham will have this conversation, and yet Abraham doesn't get what Abraham wants. But more or less, Abraham does get what he wants, because Abraham seems to be overly concerned about Lot first and foremost. Although what's fascinating is, he sees it. He sees that it is destroyed. He sees the smoke that's going up. Let's see. In chapter 19, verse 29, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. And yet he's never mentioned again. And there's no Abraham, oh no, Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. Let me go check on Lot. Actually, the story picks up in chapter 20. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the south, and he lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And that's when he said, Sarah's my sister, for the second time. So there's no interaction with Lot. And interestingly enough, he's a blessing to Lot, but he brings a curse on the king of Gerar. He brings a curse on Abimelech, because he's lied to him. So again, we've got this antithesis of Abraham going back and forth between being a blessing and being a curse. Sometimes he's a blessing to other people. Sometimes he brings a curse upon them. This will be the second time he's brought a curse upon somebody who messed with him, even though both times he's the reason that they messed with him, because they didn't know that it wasn't his sister. Um, so, and actually, Abimelech there actually has an interaction with God, and which is fascinating to have a Gentile king having a conversation with the God of the universe. And Abimelech asks a question that sounds an awful lot like what Abraham asked. He says, "Will you, my Lord, will you kill an innocent people, a righteous people, Sadak? Will you kill Sadiq? Will you kill a Sadiq people? Um, they're righteous. They didn't know." Which is very similar to what Abraham said. Will you sweep the righteous away with the wicked? Now you've got Abimelech asking God the same question, but he's asking because Abraham's gotten him in hot water. So chapter 20 is really the companion to chapters 18 and 19. We see the benefit, but then we see the curse when Abraham screws it up. Going to your point, Jordan, about how righteous is Abraham really in terms of his deeds, because he seems to, like David, get a lot of people killed or almost killed. So it's fascinating because you have this conversation that takes place, but it doesn't really accomplish what Abraham set out to accomplish, but it does sort of accomplish what Abraham sets out to accomplish because Lot is spared, and then he gets Abimelech in trouble. So you've got basically a chapter that's designed to show Abraham being a blessing and somebody being spared because of their connection with Abraham, in this case, Lot. And yet, at the same time, it's only indirectly because of Abraham, because his prayer didn't specify Lot, he specified 10 people. But God kind of knows what he wanted. So you could interpret this passage, and I've heard people mention that maybe Abraham should have kept going with the numbers, and that Abraham stopped. He should have been more bold, and he should have requested a smaller number. Do you think that's really the point that the passage is making?
Doesn't seem like it.
Mm-mm. No, but if you take it at face value, I can see why you would say that, but that kind of misses the point. It's not so much about the outcome per se, as much as it is about the process.
It's more about the reason people are saying he's not going to be righteous after all.
Yeah.
Probably, because
Mm-hmm.
you would assume righteous is
Yeah. So even there, if you were preaching and teaching on this, you would emphasize the fact that, yeah, he's not spared because he's righteous in terms of his deeds. He's really spared because of the covenant faithfulness of God to Abraham. And he has the covenant faithfulness to Abraham because Abraham's not that righteous either. So you're right, Jordan. It really does redefine the idea of who is righteous and why they're considered righteous and why there aren't more righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. And it emphasizes again Abraham's role in all of this, but it's not a role for a specific outcome as much as it is to show Abraham's role in relationship to the nations.
like Noah, similar role
Yeah.
wise.
Yeah.
Those who go with Noah on the boat, not all of them are actually righteous.
Right.
But it feels that way with Lot. It's like he's not righteous because of the
Mhm.
headship of that Abraham. He
Yes.
said,
Yeah. It's definitely a common theme that takes place throughout Genesis. That people who really aren't that righteous are spared because they're connected somehow with somebody who has a covenant relationship with God. I feel like I have read. I'm trying to think who it. Who I've come across that has a sermon about how you shouldn't stop. I want to see if I can just Google it real quick here and I want to say that I've come across a sermon even by Spurgeon, but let me see if I can just Google Spurgeon if that comes up. Yeah, I'm not seeing it. I'll have to dig it up and see if I can figure out who. I know I've come across a sermon where they basically picked on. Oh, here you go. Let me see who preached this sermon here. Who is this? Andy Davis. He is the pastor of Two Journeys Church in let's see here. Let's see if it says First Baptist Church of Durham, North Carolina. Oh, here you go. Perhaps the failure to ultimately rescue Sodom from her doom of destruction was due to Abraham's optimistic view of the condition of the city. It might have been possible, who knows, that if Abraham had entreated once more and asked him to spare the city if one righteous man was found there, he might have heeded Abraham's request. Now, what is the basic idea? Abraham stopped too soon. He should have kept praying because there was one righteous man there. Actually, he's quoting from somebody. So from E.M. Bounds, whoever that is. So there's a subtle blaming of Abraham for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Actually, he points out he says that actually in verse 33 that it says when God was finished speaking with Abraham, he left and Abraham returned home, not when Abraham finished speaking with God. So he says, who ended the prayer time? God did. God is the one who stopped at 10. He's the one who turned and walked away. If the servant turned and walked away, ending the encounter, he would get in trouble. But the king is done at verse 33. And so it is God who walked away because it was his purpose to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So I guess he doesn't take as negative a view as I thought he did. Which is a good point there that God is the one who ended it. So it wasn't that Abraham stopped it. I'll have to do some more digging and see if I can come up with one. I know I've come across a sermon that says that it is Abraham's fault, that Abraham should have kept praying. But that pastor makes a good point. It's God who walked away. So conversation was over because God said it was over, which is a good point. Yeah. So as we're applying this to anybody that we would be preaching to, how would we apply this? What would we tell our people?
Make sure you appreciate the grace of God and the fact that you are Sodom, because in the story we're not even Abraham, that would be Christ.
Mm-hmm.
But even Abraham points forward to someone who'd be much better than him.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess point out, gratitude to God for
Mm-hmm.
his grace, but also thankfulness for a covenant mediator.
Mm-hmm.
Because without Abraham, there's
Yeah.
not much of a sense that there would have been any mediatorship on behalf of them.
Right.
And also, I guess
Yeah.
you'd be very scared of God's judgment
Mhm.
because it's brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you could definitely draw out the idea of Abraham being a blessing upon the nations by interceding. That's ultimately fulfilled in Christ interceding for us. We are the ones who are the called out ones that are rescued from those that are headed to destruction. Yeah, that would be a good way to apply it. What difference does it make in how we would act today as trying to be a blessing upon the nations, perhaps?
I guess there's a sense in which we're in Sodom almost,
Mm-hmm.
because Abraham's trying to bless from looking on the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
We're called to be a blessing from the inside out
Yeah.
almost.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess remembering that the destruction we're warning of is not temporary one,
Right.
and it's going to be a final one. I
Mm-hmm.
guess it would give us more urgency,
Yeah.
I'd say, because we realize this is much greater than Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right. Yeah, in some ways we are fleeing the wrath to come. So we're fleeing the city of man for the city of God. And yet, there is that reminder from Peter, as odd of a statement it is, that Lot was the preacher of righteousness. And so we're, in a sense, interceding on behalf of our world as we're praying for our world, but also preaching the gospel and preaching about the one who intercedes for us and telling them about the mercy of God. He gets his two daughters to go with him. They're obviously of marriable age, but his wife and his two sons-in-laws get left behind. He tries to get them to go with him, but they won't. So he is in a sense trying to warn them about the wrath that's coming and telling them we got to get out. Maybe that's part of the preaching of righteousness that takes place. So you're right, we're more like Lot in a lot of ways than like Abraham, even if there is a calling on some level that we're supposed to pray and intercede on behalf of others. But you're right, we're probably more like Lot than like Abraham. Yeah. Jordan, do you have any thoughts?
I think it's, I guess, important that this passage of Lot being rescued from Sodom for his supposed righteousness comes right before the only other story we hear of him, which is his unrighteousness with his daughters.
Yep.
And then really kind of highlights that these come right after the other thing. Really kind of highlights that it's not his righteousness that makes him righteous, if he has any righteousness.
Yeah.
If it's only the covenant mediator, I think, as Jeremiah said. And then, I think I think in some ways we're both Lot and Abraham. We're like Lot, and then God kind of makes us like Abraham, kind of unites us with the covenant mediator, and tells us to go out and to intercede, to, what is it Paul says, we share in the work of redemption. We're forgetting exactly how he says that, the God calling of reconciliation. He has us, I forget what his phrase is, but yeah, he to join in the work that Abraham does, but ultimately God does with his interceding.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, we are participants in it, even though we are Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah. Yeah. Those are good thoughts. Those are very good. Yeah. It's good. Any other questions on this text, or any other thoughts, or? Okay. Well, give some more thought as to what passage you want to do for your exegesis paper. And then for your word study, as you pick a word in the text, just shoot me an email telling me which word you're going to do. Just so that I, if there's a word that you pick and I'm like, doing the probably isn't going to get you very far, then I could just offer some feedback of maybe there's a better word. So yeah, just want to be able to help out there. So yep, quiz is coming up for the big one with, was it
That was
429?
the question I had.
Yeah.
So I was assuming it was due by the next class period, but on Canvas it says on Saturday.
Oh yeah, the dates are all screwed up, but next Saturday's fine.
Okay.
Yep, whatever. Yep. Yeah, I didn't get the dates all fixed. I thought I had, but as we've gone on, I've realized I didn't. So yeah, I screwed them all up. So yeah, and I'll try to get your other little paper done soon and back to you. So yeah. I was looking at the syllabus. Let me pull it up again here. Because I noticed, I think 7, 9. Oh, nope, never mind. I do have it right. So we will not meet was it the 20th or the 27th of November? But we will meet the 3rd and the 10th. And then I'm actually out of town on the 15th of December, which is supposed to be week 14. Yeah. So we'll kind of play it by ear. We'll either not have class, well, we won't have class on the 15th either way, but we either not have class and we'll just say that's the end. Or we may try to do something the week of the 22nd. But we'll see. Because usually we do like a dinner or something, but Christmas time gets pretty crazy, so I don't want to overload the schedule too much. I just like dinner, so yeah.
Works for me.
So we'll figure something out.
Right. If we do it then I will be 21. So
Oh, there you go.
Actually,
there you go, and it'll be Christmas break, so we can all go get wasted. It'll be great fun. We can all be Presbyterians. It'll be great fun. Be great fun. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll figure something out.
The dean to come in for that one.
Yes. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll keep you posted as we get closer on that one. So yeah. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening. And we'll see you tomorrow night, I guess.
All right.
Aubrey and I will be there.
Cool.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye.